Okay, hey guys and ladies, it's Mr. Forgione again, just back with a new video, and this one is going to be a little bit different. This week actually is going to be a little bit different. We're going to take a break from the AP Micro stuff, although I will have a video later on in the week talking a little bit about the FRQ that I had posted last week. So we will do a little wrap-up video on that. But this week we're going to be talking more about AP Gov because 1 week from 1 week from Monday. So depending on when you're watching this, could be on Sunday, could be on Monday, whatever. Monday, May 11th, that is the actual AP government exam. That's going to be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll take it on the laptop, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, this first video is going to be detailing the procedures a little bit with regard to the AP exam, and then also getting into one of the FRQs just from a procedural standpoint. Later on this week, we're going to have more videos that talk a little bit more content, review. I'm having extra office hours this week, so I will have office hours basically at least 1 hour Tuesday through Friday, and I think Friday I'm having 3 hours on there of office hours, so that way you guys can kind of jump in and ask questions whenever you need if you want to do that. But like I said, this first video just talking about procedure a little bit. So I'll get going on that. Okay, first thing with the AP Gov exam, I want you guys to make sure that whatever email you have given the College Board, whatever one you signed up with for like AP Classroom or what have you, that you are using that email or checking it at least once a day, because they're going to send you an email ticket that is your way of getting into the actual AP exam. So you'll be able to basically not only be able to, you have to use that ticket to be able to get into the exam on the 11th at 4 o'clock. You're going to have, from that point, once the exam actually starts, you're going to have 45 minutes to complete the exam, and then 5 minutes to upload. Now, it's open note, open book, you can use whatever you want, so that's an advantage, but you can only use one device. Now, the reason that that's important, if you're choosing to handwrite whatever it is that you're turning in for the AP exam, then you're going to have to take a picture of it and upload it. That means that if you're using your cell phone to take the picture and upload, you're also going to have to use the cell phone to download that prompt and look back at the cell phone for that. If you've got a tablet that takes pictures, you could use that. That may be easier to see it on if you're handwriting, or if you're using a laptop, you wouldn't necessarily need to take a picture or anything. You could use your laptop to type out your response and then upload it that way. But you're only allowed to use one device, so you can't use a laptop and a tablet or a laptop and a cell phone. So, take that for what it's worth and just kind of plan out a little bit. Now, supposedly at 8 a.m. they're doing a practice run. If you want to do that, that's actually tomorrow, I think, that I got word on that kind of late that they're doing a practice run on May 4th. Feel free, do it, don't do it. I don't know how worthwhile that's going to be, but certainly you're welcome to try that. But essentially, the way that the exam is going to work is that 45 minutes you're going to have 2 free response questions. One is going to be very similar to the ones that we've done in class, and then one is called an argumentative response. Now notice I'm not using the term essay, I'm saying response. This is not an essay. The argumentative response is probably something that you ought to be able to knock out in about 9 or 10 sentences, okay? 9 or 10 sentences is not an essay. If you think 9 or 10 sentences is an essay, college English is going to be a kick in the pants, okay? It's not an essay. It's a simple response, and I'm actually going to take you through in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to take you through a sample argumentative response. Now, the other type of response we've done quite a few of earlier in the year. I'll post some of those. I'll do another video on that so that we can kind of feel good about it. But honestly, I wouldn't worry too much about the second response. That we've had a lot of practice with that. It's the first response, the argumentative, that we really haven't done much of. So I want to take a look at that today in this first go round. Now, if there are questions that you may have on computer access or how do I access this or what have you, email me or also email Ms. Hartwell in the front office. She is our AP coordinator right now, so if there's any issues that you may have, definitely sooner the better, contact us so we can get that squared away prior to next Monday. Okay, so the argumentative response. Basically what's going to happen, they're going to give you a question. AP is going to give you a question, and you're going to have 25 minutes to basically type it out, write it out, whatever, and before you get to the second response. What they're going to ask you to do within that response, they'll give you some type of prompt, some type of question, and you have to first come up with a thesis, okay? A thesis statement is essentially your foundational argument, okay, that sort of kicks off your belief about something. And then after that, they're going to ask you to provide two pieces of evidence, two sort of supporting details or basically reasons for your argument, and you're going to have to cite two things from government. Now, one of those things, they're going to give you a list of what they call foundational documents, and I'll show you another video later on in the week about those foundational documents. It's actually not going to be one from me. I'm going to link to a different AP teacher that does a much better job than I would do on the foundational documents and summing them up. So one, they'll kind of give you a list of 4 or 5 things and say, hey, pick one of these to use. And then the other one, you can use literally anything that you've learned in AP Gov. You just have to cite something that you've learned in AP Gov for your second piece of evidence. So what I want to do is take you through a sample one today. And I heavily doubt that they would use this particular prompt for the AP exam, but I think it works really well to kind of show you how we would attack this and how we would come up with a response. So I've got it up here, okay? This is our prompt that we're going to use. What are 2 characteristics of an effective school dress code policy? Okay, if you want to pause it here, you can, and just kind of think for a second, okay, what would my thesis be for this? What could I come up with for an effective thesis? Feel free to pause it if you want, and then I'll give you an example. Okay, hopefully at this point we've paused, we'll come back. Okay, what are 2 characteristics? So the first thing I need to lead off with, what's my thesis? So for me personally, I think 2 characteristics that we might have that would work here. I think first off, we want to restate it, and I'm not going to have maybe space to go through all of it, but I'll abbreviate a school, just say dress code policy should be, and my 2 things that I would say here is my thesis, should be flexible to account, and I would, if it was an actual prompt, I would probably specify here, flexible to account for differences between schools, and allow for individual expression, okay? That whatever the dress code policy is should be sufficiently lenient to allow for individual expression. So it should be flexible to account for differences between individual schools, and it should allow for individual expression. That is my thesis statement, okay? Now, an effective thesis, typically the way these work, they're usually out of 7 points. An effective thesis statement would be one of those points. So you would get a point just for having an effective thesis. Now, from there, what we have to do is get into our 2 pieces of evidence. For this, I'm not making a list of foundational documents. I'm just saying, okay, come up with something with 2 pieces of evidence from your, from anything we've learned in AP Gov, and then cite them here. So what I'm going to do is actually take these in opposite order. The first one I'm going to look at is allow for individual expression. Okay, where have we talked about individual expression somewhere in Gov? Again, pause if you need to. Probably First Amendment, right? That's the one that talks a lot about individual expression. I'm going to go not only First Amendment here, I'm actually going to go a little bit more specific, and I'm going to use one of those court cases that we talked about. I know it's kind of tough to remember some of those, but there was a court case we talked about called Tinker versus Des Moines, okay? Tinker versus Des Moines, and that's going to be my number 1 piece of evidence here is Tinker versus Des Moines. This is the one where we had during the Vietnam War, we had students that showed up at school with black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. They were suspended for that, and the Supreme Court essentially found that that was an unjust suspension because they had the right to use political speech, to use free speech in the classroom, so long as it was not a substantial distraction to the learning environment. Okay, so Tinker versus Des Moines, that's one of my pieces of evidence. How do I integrate that into an essay? Or, I'm sorry, not into a response, not an essay, into a response. So what I would do is say, okay, we learned, or, citing Tinker versus Des Moines, and I would give a sentence that basically explains the court case. Tinker versus Des Moines established that students have the right to have political expression in the classroom if it's not a substantial distraction. There's my explanation, right? Now what I have to do is tie that back to my thesis. I always have to take my evidence and tie it back to my thesis. So how do I do that? Well, I believe that a school dress code policy should allow for individual expression. Tinker versus Des Moines is saying, hey, students have the right to political and individual expression here, so long as it doesn't create a substantial distraction in the classroom. So to really drive the point home, what I can always do here is also give a sentence as an example. So I would say, for example, a student should be able to wear a Black Lives Matter or a Blue Lives Matter t-shirt within the classroom, because that would be showing their political expression, which we know from Tinker versus Des Moines is permitted in the United States, that's a First Amendment right. So tying that back to my thesis, that's a key thing. So you can get 3 points for stating the piece of evidence and then tying it back into your thesis. Now, you don't want to just say, I'm citing Tinker versus Des Moines, and then not tell us what Tinker versus Des Moines is. You do have to give a sentence or two just, again, saying Tinker versus Des Moines, establish that, and then tie it back in. Okay, the second thing that I'm going to look at here, my second piece of evidence here, I can phrase in a couple of different ways. My second one is going to be dealing with this flexible to account for individual school needs. So I'm going to cite one of two things. I can either cite federalism in general, okay, the concept of federalism, which is that power should be spread between or shared between federal and state and local governments. So I can either use the concept of federalism as a piece of evidence, or if I want to get even more specific and I can remember it or look it up in my notes, because remember, these are open notes, so you got your notes there, you can look all this stuff up, I can use the 10th Amendment. Now you may go, what is the 10th Amendment again? 10th Amendment says if power is not explicitly given to the federal government, then it is reserved for the state governments or for the state or local government, right? So I can reference this and say, all right, different school districts and different schools themselves have different needs. Now here's where I throw an example. For an example, at Gainesville High School, we have a policy that bans hoodies and hats for certain months out of the year. I think it's March 1st or something like that, that the hats go away, right? Now, if you're in school in Minnesota, would that be possibly, would you maybe have different needs? Yeah, because in March and April and honestly in May, it's still pretty cold in Minnesota. So you may have to alter that policy to allow for hats, to allow for hoodies, to allow for whatever it is that's cold weather clothing, because it's still cold there. Maine, same thing. One of my best friends got married up in Maine. I'll never forget this, June 6th, 2004. The reason I remember that, it was June 6th, and it was 42 degrees and raining. I said Maine has basically two seasons. They have winter and August. That's it. So in a state like that, or in an area like that, hey, those policies are going to have to be altered to account for the temperatures, things like that. Also, if we're talking about, elementary school versus high school, those are also with different ages, those are going to be different needs as well. In elementary school, you normally have, you don't dress out necessarily for PE, you have recess or PE within the confines of the school day. So there may be some different things that apply there. So I would give an example, a sentence or two example there, and then again, take this federalism or 10th Amendment, however you want to phrase it, take that and then tie it back to the concept of flexibility because of the different needs and because the 10th Amendment gives state governments and local governments the right to regulate schools based on their individual needs of their citizens. We have to be flexible to the individual needs of those schools. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, okay, as far as how we would attack this type of response. I'll have another video later in the week dealing with examples of the other type of response that you're going to see on the exam. I'll try to do a review video as well just to kind of go through what's the content that I would think is going to be on there. Personally, I think it's going to be institutions. I think that's going to be the focus, but we'll get there. Hopefully this helps. I will be uploading every day. Make sure that you're watching videos on this. Make sure you're studying. If there's questions that I can answer, please let me know, and I'll post the office hours as well. If you have individual questions, that's a great way of getting them answered. Love you guys. Miss you all. Hope to see you soon.